Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Strout, and I'm the CEO of Tack Advisors. And today I'm joined by Kay Herdlinger, who is a former executive assistant, head of operations to multiple very high profile individuals across politics, philanthropy, and technology. And so we are going to spend a little bit of time today talking about her career journey and how she has developed now into her own coaching practice. So thank you so much for joining us, Kay. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be with you today.
And so before we dive in and start with talking about your story, I just want to remind everybody who's joining us that we cannot see or hear you, but hopefully you can hear and see us. So if you have any questions throughout this webinar, please go ahead and throw them in the Q&A or chat function so that we can make sure to answer them throughout this conversation. And if you want to go ahead and get started, just tell us where you're joining us from. We always love to see, who's joining us from all around the world. So with that being said, Kay, you've had such an interesting career supporting people like Senator Pryor, then you moved on and supported Sheryl Sandberg, and then also Arianna Huffington. And so it would be really helpful, I think, just to get started with you sort of walking us through your career journey and how you got from role to role and what you sort of learned at a high level along the way.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you again for having me here. So excited to be here with everyone. And so my journey is quite the journey. I've gone all around, so I'll just sort of spend a little bit of time walking you through my journey. So I graduated college from the University of Georgia, and then I moved to Washington, D.C., where I became an intern for a senator from Arkansas. I'm originally from Arkansas, and her name is Senator Blanche Lincoln. And while I was interning with Senator Lincoln, I kind of took some time to figure out where I was going. Really, truth be told, I knew about the admin world, but wasn't really in it. I didn't really know a lot. Then when my internship ended, I actually got an offer from Senator Mark Pryor, the other senator from Arkansas, to just answer the phones, be the front office liaison answering phones. And while I was there, I got to know the current scheduler. And I just loved everything she did. I thought, oh my goodness, I want to learn more about what this role is. And so that was really my first kind of insight into being this scheduler. So I started saying, teach me what you're doing, give me all your work that you don't want to do. Let me learn. And, one of the things I always say too, is there's so much power in letting people know what you want, what you're looking for, what you want to learn. And so she sort of taught me along the way. And then as she was actually leaving the senator's office, then I became the scheduler because she knew that I had kind of done all of that. So what's really fun is as a scheduler, you get to schedule everyone. My senator served on the Commerce Committee, which oversees internet. And around this time, this company called Facebook was starting to come around. And I remember scheduling the meeting for my senator and Mark Zuckerberg. And so that was my first introduction to Facebook. So I got to know, the Facebook team, all of that. When they decided to open their DC office, they actually recruited me from the senator's office. So there's that connection, sort of making a connection to move on to my next step. So with I helped start the Washington, D.C. office from everything. It was from, like becoming an office. Now it's grown so much. But while there, I was introduced to Sheryl Sandberg, who was in California. And from there, we developed a relationship. Sort of part of my personal story, which I'll share because I think that personal stories tie into life, right? So while I was at Facebook, I actually got married and moved to Georgia. So I was working remotely. And while I was working remotely, this is the time when Sheryl was kind of coming out with she was coming out with her book, Lean In, and all of this kind of stuff. And so I was separated, kind of still doing some stuff, but also helped Sheryl with her book tour. So part of my personal story is I was married, but I was in an abusive marriage. And Sheryl was one of the first people that I told. She was my boss. I needed to take time off of work. And having such an amazing, supportive boss, she gave me the opportunity then, because I was leaving my abusive marriage, to move out to Facebook headquarters and work on her team directly. And it all worked out, just sort of with her team. She actually had someone going on maternity leave. And so it was just perfect. So I was Sheryl's EA out at Facebook headquarters. And during that time, now I've left this abusive marriage. I'm out here. And, all of the things, you're constantly going on fire with everybody, trying to keep all the lines straight. And I am now living out in California. And little side note that I don't always share with people, but I think that this is really important, is while I was out in California, I interviewed with Elizabeth Holmes, who many of you have heard the name. So yes, Elizabeth Holmes with Theranos. And it was to the point, like the job offer, was there. It was a moment of, okay, where am I going to go? That was one day. I interviewed, kind of got the situation, had to figure out what I was doing. That either that same day or within 24 hours, Sheryl actually asked me to run operations for her nonprofit Lean In, which had now become a nonprofit, and was actually becoming, or it was a nonprofit. So she asked me if I would run operations for the whole nonprofit. So within there, my life could have changed so much. I had that decision to make. All of these are administrative roles as well. And I chose to go with Lean In. So now I'm at Lean In, and women's empowerment, love it, all of it. I still have a Lean In sign over here in my office. But then it was time for me to just personally move back to the East Coast. So on my way back to the East Coast, I sort of detoured a little bit because Hillary Clinton was running for president at this time. And so I took some time to work on her advance team for her campaign. So I got to travel around and do advance work with her, which was awesome. Again, tying back to sort of everything connects, right? Like all of these connections, everything connects. Now the campaign is over. Where am I going to go? Right. And so I was connected with Arianna Huffington, who at this point was now launching her new business venture, Thrive Global, in New York. And so I went to New York and helped Arianna launch Thrive Global. And there was something in my mind, like as a domestic violence survivor, I always wanted to do something to help. I was very fortunate to have the resources and the path to kind of get out, but so many people don't. And so my personal passion and working through all of this, I actually now have started my own company, Thread Talk, which we sell cozy soft blankets and donate 10% of the proceeds to domestic violence shelters all across the United States. And so I've sort of gone from government, corporate, nonprofit, and startup world. I've been all over, now an entrepreneur. But what ties this all together is when I was back at my time in the Senate. So this, my very first career, I actually wanted to get more into coaching. What is coaching? Let me learn more about it. So while I was in the Senate, I actually became a certified coach. And so coaching has been a part of this whole journey the whole time. And though I haven't actively, I didn't have a coaching business, I wasn't actively coaching, throughout this whole time, or have a coaching business. Now I'm at a point in my life where I have seen what coaching has done for me, what I've been able to help with other people with coaching. And so now I have joined Cashbox Coaching, and I'm coaching others. So that is where my journey has taken me now. And I'm just so excited to share my journey with everyone as well, and dive right in.
Yeah, that's such a great story. I remember when we connected probably 5 or so years ago, and I remember hearing about it and being so inspired, because I think there's so many like wonderful learnings about that, and excited we get to talk to everybody about that today. So kind of going back to, you've been this certified coach for over 12 years. It started when you were at the Senate. So you had this sort of fundamental experience that then you've been able to use and sort of take with you from position to position. So I'm curious to know, like, what did you learn from coaching that you were able to apply in supporting people like Sheryl Sandberg and Hillary Clinton and Arianna Huffington? I mean, these huge names who had, like, I'm sure, a fleet of people supporting them. So what do you think, like, really helped you sort of build that strong connection and relationship?
Yeah, totally. So for me too, when you look at kind of that administrative role, right? The traditional support role and things like that, you're called upon to do tasks. And I mean, we're given tasks. We help everybody stay on task too, as well. But really, coaching, it allows these pathways for different conversations to take place. And now when tasks are being, given, discussed, and things like that, being able to have these discussions to allow us to better understand the task and to prioritize better than to sort of be like, here, that sort of kind of command and control where, in our roles, sometimes that's how it is, sort of like, these are the things. And sometimes you don't really understand what's going on, even though we, try. So to be able to have those discussions and really create those pathways to further understand.
Absolutely. And so I'd be curious to know, like, over your time, what type of people have you coached? Have you always been like actively coaching on the side while you were supporting these individuals, or is coaching really just something that you started to do as of late, since starting Thread Talk and moving out of the full-time support position?
Yeah. So I have been coaching, but nothing as formalized as now. Just because having these other things, that took precedence over my coaching career at the time. But now joining Cashbox Coaching is definitely more formalized. So yes, I have had coaching clients throughout, and now I'm, with Cashbox Coaching. And so, with Cashbox Coaching, and I may be jumping ahead a little bit, so you can feel free to stop me. But we coach individual clients as well as corporate clients there.
And what type of industries or types of companies do you specialize in? Is there, do you focus primarily on administrative support roles? Do you work with any type of company? And if so, like, is there a common thread between everything that you do for coaching and every individual?
Yes. Well, I have to say, of course, my personal passion is coaching administrative professionals, because that's where my heart lies. And I love that so much. Just even connecting with other administrative professionals too is just like, brings my heart. It makes my heart happy. So that is where I go. But in terms of clients that we've coached and things like that, they range everywhere from healthcare to like the service industry to startups, CEOs. Again, I love the administrative professionals, but also we've done musicians and sports personalities as well.
Yeah. Is there like a common challenge that people have been having, or maybe even so in the past couple of years, especially with everything going on in the pandemic, that you think you have had to really help people overcome?
Yeah, good question. And really, I think a lot when, everybody's different, but sort of that common theme really kind of sometimes comes down to let's say like communication styles and understanding and seeing someone else's point of view, that we're not all the same, right? Which is, and so being able to coach and kind of see your inner self as well as others too. So I definitely think that that's kind of the common underlying theme, that once kind of you can get over that you start to see the world in a little bit or a different place.
Yeah. And I know that that you do one-on-one coaching, but this corporate coaching, this is something that, we're just starting with you, and it's, I think, awesome and amazing and super exciting. So I'd love for you to explain a little bit more about how corporate coaching works. First of all, what does Cashbox even mean? Because I know it's an acronym. Some of you can outline that a little bit more and how that relates to corporate coaching for teams.
Totally. So going back to what is Cashbox? So Cashbox is cash with a K, and cash stands for knowledge, attitudes, skills, and habits. And so the Cashbox, which is, we kind of create a 4-corner box that is hard to show right here. But it is a performance coaching tool that we use to illustrate the individual characteristics, both organizational and the individual performance. And you have to have all 4, right? Like knowledge, attitudes, skills, and habits. Because if you just have knowledge and skills and you're missing the attitudes and habits, it kind of doesn't always come together. And so that's sort of our coaching performance tool that we use for the whole piece of it. And so then that is Cashbox. And then in coming back to corporate coaching. So corporate coaching is coaching a group of individuals within the same company. So we have a minimum of 6, maximum of 12 for a group. Again, these are individuals all within the same company. And they could be varying, levels of in the company, and also different roles as well, truthfully, but all within the same company. We do 8 weeks of developmental coaching sessions with the entire group. And then, as I mentioned, that sort of communicational, behavioral styles and things is so important. So for each individual, we provide a DISC assessment, which is, if folks don't know what the DISC assessment is, it is an assessment that measures behavioral and performance styles. So we do that for each participant. And then after we have the group coaching, I do 3 one-on-one coaching sessions scheduled individually with all of the participants. And then, so that's sort of phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3, there's an option to continue with me one-on-one individually.
Yeah. So I'd be curious to hear from you, what do you think are the benefits to doing corporate coaching, right? Coaching within your team, within your company, versus maybe small group coaching for a lot of individuals from different companies, versus doing one-off trainings versus doing one-on-one coaching? What do you see as the differentiators between those different modalities and the value that you get from corporate coaching?
Absolutely. I think the best way to answer that is by giving an example to show. And so if I'm just coaching an individual and they are talking about having, an issue with, and I'm just going to make up a name here. Let's say Jane, right? So issue kind of with Jane. I don't know Jane. I don't know what's going on. I'm just sort of getting that one-sided story. But in a corporate coaching world, I would not only be coaching my client, but also Jane. And then I can better understand what's going on. So for example, if my client's having a problem, I can understand Jane from her DISC survey and say, oh, she's a high D. She needs just sort of bullet points. And you've been giving her 3 pages of information. She's not even looking at those pages of information. She needs those bullet points. And so again, it's sort of helping to understand, because it helps me coach as well because I can see the full picture. One thing that is super important, and I want to make sure that I stress this, is in coaching, it's confidential. I'm not going to, ever share anything with others unless I get permission. But when I say that too, by me having that, coaching both people or multiple people in the same company, it gives me a better broad range of understanding and the full picture. Whereas it's not just sort of one-sided trying to kind of figure that out too. So I think there's such huge benefit in that.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that, with this group coaching, it's 8 weeks of developmental training, you get the DISC assessment. And so like, what would that kind of look like if you had to lay out like week 1, or is it even before week 1, people take this DISC assessment? And then is it like education around what the DISC profile is? And then how do you like learn about everybody's different knowledge, attitudes, skills, and habits, and how they relate to each other?
Yeah. So each week we get together, and the DISC assessment is sort of in the beginning, right? And we dive into each person, but the 8 weeks does not cover the DISC assessment really. It's for you to internalize, for that kind of thing. But each week we have different, I'm going to call them lessons for lack of, lessons. And so that's what we also want to do. We not only coaching, but also leadership development as well. So within these sessions, we have different leadership development models. And so each week you get a new little lesson. And then we do coaching off of that as well within those 8 sessions. So we would, each week there would be a different handout, and we would kind of formulate the discussion around that, and do the group coaching. And then separately, the individual coaching, that's totally separate from these lessons, but you're developing your leadership skills and understanding through these sessions, which then takes you to a different level to be coached after that.
And I'd love to understand, so knowledge, attitude, skills, and habits, as it relates to this administrative role, like how are you sort of sussing out like different levels of knowledge, different types of attitudes, their skill set, what habits, to help make them really successful in this role?
Oh, for sure. So, and also when you think a lot about in this role in particular too, trust me, I know there are a ton of skills that go on with this, right? Like I know too. And kudos to all the administrative professionals because you guys are my people. But a lot of times in companies, people offer training and development, right? And that focuses on what I will call in the cash box, that one quadrant, knowledge and skills. And so we're always developing, how to, oh my gosh, there's so many things, there's so many things, how to schedule this way, how to run a spreadsheet, how to do this, how to do that. But then when you really peel back the layers, and it's done, coaching is done through a series of questioning too. So asking these questions to help you understand your different attitudes and habits that you have that sometimes people don't even realize. Like what I like to say is we help you see your blind spots too. Because you could be charging right through every day, right? Like I know exactly what I'm doing. This, book told me to do it this way, or I Googled something and now I'm more efficient in XYZ. But if you have that negative attitude, or even a negative attitude towards somebody else, right, that you're working with, be it, a conflict with your boss, a conflict with a coworker. Sometimes it even, as I shared, sometimes your personal life comes to work and you don't always, you can't help it, right? Like we are one person, our personal life, our work life, it's going to mix. You don't have a choice in that. And so to be able to understand what's going on that piece as well, that's where it bridges it all together. And so again, with coaching, we don't just focus on building your knowledge and skills, but also the attitudes and habits.
Yeah, I think that's so important because and I see this all the time, and I see it even within my own team, and I've seen it with myself. And as my careers progress, like been very, you know, a strong worker. I think having strong skills and knowledge of a specific area, but not totally self-aware of the way I've shown up to work, or I've had colleagues that don't realize the way that they respond to something could be misinterpreted as like passive aggressive, or
Right.
and it's like not at all something that they intend to do, or that even I've intended to do. And it's not without somebody pointing that out to me,
Right.
that it is something that now I'm aware of, and have to be proactive in showing up in a different way. And so I think that is really interesting.
Yeah. And I want to kind of even plug a little thing say a little something about that too, is because it's like truly, again, life changes, right? Like I will even tell you, even in my performance reviews, I'm happy to like spout this off too. There was a time in my life, and it was sort of like speak up. Like sometimes you don't speak up until after something happens, and it's like, oh yeah. But the truth is that was a point in my life when my personal life back home, I couldn't speak up. It was sort of like that was something that got brought into the workplace that, like you said, I wasn't even understanding. And I also think it's important to note that I always have a coach myself. Like, I think that's important too. I coach, but I also have a coach. And so also to have my coach be able to help me understand that, like, you realize like you're kind of bringing your work, I can't help it, but it just made me more aware, to your point, of like, oh, you're right. And then once I realized it, then my performance reviews changed completely. Like now, like they're like, stop talking. No, not really, but it was, I didn't realize, like you said, that it was really affecting my work and affecting sort of just the way that I would react or have that attitude and the things that I was doing. And so that, changed me around for the better.
Yeah. Talking about the habits piece. So what kind of habits are you kind of coaching on? Because I think I will be the first to admit is I am very bad at setting healthy habits for myself, because I tend to put everybody else ahead of me in my own personal life. And so I'm curious to know, like, is there a common thread in the type of habits that you're coaching on? And where does that piece fall into this sort of box of cash box coaching?
Yeah, definitely. And I think again, everybody's different, but that sort of common theme too is also, when you think of habits can also be the habitual way that you're treating somebody, or the habitual way you have an attitude to somebody. That's why attitudes and habits are kind of in the same
vertical.
Yeah, the same vertical. Because those habits, like, you just fall into different things. So to say like somebody has, or there's a common habit that people have, again, talking generically, it's sort of those things and the way we approach things. So like, it could be that habit of like, which doesn't sound like a habit, but it is like, this person annoys me all the time, so I'm just always going to think that this person annoys me all the time, and I'm going to approach it that way each time, which is the attitude, but that's the habit too, because the habit is just something, we do, right? And so, even if your attitude is like happy-go-lucky that day, and then you run into that person, you're like, oh, well, I'm usually used to, not doing that. So that, I think, is sort of generic. But then if you break it down, it could be all kinds of different things. It could be time management, right? Like you're always late, that, and that kind of stuff too. Those different habits that we don't always realize that they are habits, that that's just the way we go through life. So again, those kinds of things aren't all the way across the board, but those are the types of things that we can kind of dig into and see, like, do you realize this is the way you're trading every day? And that.
And so since you're doing this is corporate coaching and as a team, and then they have their homework that they do sort of on the side, their exercises, they do one-on-one coaching. I'd be curious to know, like, let's say I'm just throwing out examples, like the corporate culture is that people are regularly late to meetings. And people, we have not, by the way, anybody looking at this rehearsed this. So I'm just like going to throw Hannah under the bus here for a second of like majority, let's say the majority of the leaders in the company are habitually late to meetings. And nobody really says anything about it because it's just the way it's always been, but it's really actually upsetting to people. And so if you had a group of people in corporate coaching and this was something that was brought up that wanted to be addressed, like how would you go about addressing that as like a habit and an attitude? I'd be curious to know something like that.
Yeah, no, totally. And I want to say, because you kind of said like the whole company too, like what does that company value? Where that's sort of where you kind of look like what's important to this company, like maybe meetings, they don't care, that they're just nonchalantly like, we're just having this meeting to have this meeting and that kind of thing. Because I do think that there is a definite difference in different company cultures and that kind of thing. So to really have everyone aligned, right, on what are those values and missions, and we can read those all day long, right? Like we all have value and mission statements and this kind of thing too. But when you're in it and you're doing it, like, what are those things, right? And so if people may not realize that like being late to every meeting messes up your entire rest of your day for a lot of people. And so then their productivity is slowed or delayed or something because this certain group or the whole company is running late every time. Right. And so it's, again, looking at everything as a whole of like, do you realize that like running late is messing up your productivity when if you guys just kept your meeting on time, this allows everybody to do their job in a timely manner? Or again, do you just not really care about meetings or something like that? Then that needs to be addressed and known. So it's kind of, again, peeling those rocks back and seeing those blind spots that are down there and how your actions or the company's actions as a whole really does change, like one little step, one little something can make or break the company in that sense.
Yeah. And I got to imagine because these are groups of like 6 to 12 people. So it's a pretty big section of either a specific division within a company or a leadership team within a company or an admin team within a company, that can be pretty transformational because like you said, you're no longer getting one side of a story, you're getting 6 sides of a story or 12 sides of a story, and having like really hard conversations of like, is this aligned with our values? Do meetings really matter? If meetings don't really matter, then let's just do away with meetings. Who really likes sitting in meetings anyway? Right? Like, less meetings for us to schedule.
And that's the thing too. A lot of times people, that's their habit. Like they know, like, oh, well, we're supposed to have a meeting on this, or, oh, I'm supposed to write a 3-page report on something, when it's like, do you really need to spend time writing that 3-page report, or can you just give the highlights and like that, let's kind of figure out what's slowing us down and get us all right and all aligned. And also I do want to mention, so we keep the group 6 to 12 just to not have them huge, but we understand also that companies a lot of times are not always, but sometimes more than 12 people and that kind of thing too. So we've done multiple groups within the same company, but again, just to keep it on task. And we found that like between 6 and 12 is like that magic number. And so we've definitely done multiple sessions, multiple group coachings within the same company too. So it's not just sort of like, oh, you can only pick 12 people. No, that's just for the group size, that's where we've found out. I mean, there are actually companies that were brought in to basically with their orientation and kind of kick folks off. And then they have the option to one-on-one coach with us. And like, that's of course, amazing, like, you know, because then, like you said, you see the whole thing and you're able to energize and align folks on the same. The other thing, which I'm just going to be completely transparent about too, is sometimes when you're coaching, when we're coaching, we realize like maybe XYZ person is not in the right spot. Their heart's not in it. They can't get there. That's not there. That is what's bringing some folks down. And not that we're coaching to like weed out people. That is not what I'm saying at all.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that their heart, their passion is somewhere else. So let them fly, let them flourish somewhere else, and bring someone else in who's, you know, whose heart is in with that company. Because as you guys can see, I mean, I changed a bajillion times in between, you know, and sometimes that's just where people go, and you don't want somebody just sticking around when their heart's not in it.
Yeah, I would imagine. And so I'd be curious to know, do you have any sort of favorite clients that you worked with, or success stories, or things that like have been really fun for you to see and experience while you've done corporate coaching?
1000%. And mine, and it kind of goes for all of Cashbox coaching, but for me too. There was actually a book written about this one because it was so transformational. And the book is called Healing a Hospital. And it was a hospital was the client as well. This hospital was literally on the like almost phasing out to non-existence. And through coaching and working with them, they are now an award-winning hospital. It's down in Georgia. It's amazing. And to be a part of that transformation and to see an entire hospital system come up and now be thriving when essentially it was on the downhill. So that is definitely my favorite. And that's one specific example, even in individuals. Like I love that, right? Like I love when we can help people see their full potential and get there, because let me raise my hand. Sometimes we're in that like downward spiral, right? Like we just don't know how we're going to get out. We feel like it's this tornado, and having a coach and working around that can really help you get to your full potential. And when we're all operating at our full potential for the good of the company, or even for the good of ourselves, it moves us in the right direction. And it sounds so simple, but it's so much. I mean, again, I have my coach, like, you know, like I know I can get through things with my coach too. And it is true. And I'm, you know, living proof of that as well. So that's why I love coaching others now.
Yeah. So can you give us the literal TLDR, too long didn't read, of this Healing the Hospital experience? Like what were the initial sort of challenges that the hospital was facing? What did you uncover through the coaching, and what was ultimately what turned it around to make it now this successful organization?
Well, and I think that, you know, sort of comes down to making sure even like the leadership's aligned on those values and mission statements and that kind of thing too. Because once leadership is aligned too, and being able to pass that down. So even starting with the basic of that, because when you hop into a company, you assume everybody's aligned and in that, but like, you know, somebody can hand you a piece of paper and say, this is what we do, and then act totally separately, right? Like that's not alignment. That's like saying, you know, I'm just doing what this piece of paper says. So really getting folks aligned on that is like bottom line first step. But then as we've progressed through that too, then it really comes down to kind of touches all the little things that I've dropped little nuggets into, like making sure that the people who are there want to be there, making sure that they are aware of how they're talking to other people, how they're working with other people. Maybe, you know, this department, like, you know, for the hospital in particular, it was like the food service, right? Like some departments don't even think about like the food service being delayed or something like that. But when that's delayed, then that sort of triggers down all these other different parts of the hospital. So like understanding that it all comes together as one, and once it's fixed, everybody can move together. So it's, again, uncovering those blind spots that maybe this department or these people over here don't even know that's going on over here, even though they probably have a million meetings, right? Like those things just aren't brought up because each person is set on their own task, right? And when you have someone like myself, like a coach that could come in and sort of understand and work on kind of like an outsider, but helping within too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about teamwork for a minute, because would you say the majority of the people that you do coaching in this kind of cash box coaching method typically are within the same team, or like either a leadership team or like an admin team? And if so, do you see any common threads on where there are typical breakdowns in teams that make them not work necessarily as productively together?
Yeah. And so, I've done them all, right? Like sometimes people are from different departments that they're all, let's say they're all admins, but they're all in different departments. But again, when you look at a company, you all have to work together, right? So to me, you're all a team. Everybody in your company, you guys are a team. But then when you break it down kind of to departments, so I'm going to kind of give a little twofer here, right? So like when you're in your department, those are people that you're working with every day, right? Like that is, you may sometimes work with these other departments because you all have to work together to come together. So it is a little bit of a different dynamic, right? When these people when you work together as a team every day, you just know more about each other, their personal life sometimes, not always, not everybody shares their personal life, and that's to each their own. I didn't for a long time. And so I think in terms of, what's kind of the difference between the department and working amongst each other is really, you just have to look at everybody as a team. So even though you're not working, with that person every day, really understanding and breaking it down just as you would if you were a whole department working on that. So there's not a true difference when everyone's in the same company, because in the long run, you're all working together for the goal of the greater good.
Yeah. Now, as it relates to like admin teams, right? Like if people are interested in doing this internally as an admin team, what would be, because there's like a mission and a vision of a company, but what if maybe like an admin team doesn't have a specific admin mission and vision? How do you go about like building them together as a team? Maybe historically, I see this a lot, right? With a lot of companies where admins have been very siloed, right? They'll like one will directly support their chief technology officer, another person directly supports the CEO, and they almost operate sometimes as their own individual islands,
right?
And are very focused on exactly what their executive wants. But maybe what their executive wants isn't exactly aligned with what the other person's executive wants. And so how do you, using sort of like cash box model, bring admins or teams like that together that have historically always worked in these individual silos that necessarily hasn't been super productive?
Yes. And I definitely hear you on that too, right? Because that's the other thing too. When, we're the admin, we prioritize what our boss says, right? Like what, maybe we're an admin to a CFO and then somebody else is to the CEO, and the CEO is doing all of these other things. The CFO has their department, and so how, to your point, like, how does that work too? First of all, I want to say that like the reason I love working with administrative professionals is like, we are the backbone. Hard stop, right? Like we keep the things running for sure. And that is why when I get hired by a company, automatically, like first step, they're above and beyond everybody else because they're taking the time to invest in their employees, right? I actually was coaching someone who actually left a company and said they weren't, the previous company wasn't investing in me and my development and that kind of thing. And so first off, that's the great thing. Now, your question of how do you bring everybody kind of together in that sense is, again, just helping people understand and realizing that, like, just because your person is prioritizing this, be transparent and have those things. Like, this is what sort of, you know, again, confidentiality, I 100% understand that, but sort of like mapping it out and having those different conversations, as I was mentioning in the very beginning, about those pathways where instead of it's just sort of like, this is what we have to do, it's like, let's have those discussions to understand how we can, you know, prioritize correctly, instead of just saying like, this is, you know, this is the most important because this is the most important, and like make it most important. So it's being able to have those conversations.
Yeah. Do you think it's beneficial? Because I'm just thinking about like a few different case studies of where we've helped advise on our side, on the tech side, with organizations that have historically had an EA that directly reports into each one of their execs, and the execs, you can have like at the beginning of the year, like a set of OKRs for the organization, but sometimes priorities change, things change, and that can get lost. And so, you know, speaking of EAs, it really being the backbone, or chiefs of staff, or any type of administrative function, you know, I think sometimes there has to be some like behind the scenes work and communication amongst admins to help almost like repurpose, like re-guide and restructure their executives, and do a little bit of like managing up when they think this one particular task is important, and say, you know, I know that, you know, right now you think this meeting is really important, but our overarching goals, as we said at the beginning of the year, were this. And I know that like Sally, who's supporting the CEO, is currently also working on that. Like, should we maybe realign the meeting accordingly? Right. And so I think there does need to be, even if not like formally structured within the company, some sort of gather, so to speak, of administrative professionals, where they're constantly communicating and aligning and realigning priorities as an admin team to make sure that their executives are staying on track. Would you agree?
100%. And that's the beauty too of being able to see, you know, from our standpoint too, because I say ours, you know, administrative professionals, because I still consider myself one, even though I've kind of gone. But with that, like, you're absolutely right. It's almost like we have that different vantage point too, right? And even to be able, so my example with like the CFO and the CEO or something too, like saying, having the admin say like, I understand this is your priority, but in talking with, you know, whoever the other admin is too, I have insight that like, these are other things that are happening, and having that transparency. Whereas like, we're kind of able to, like you said, manage up too, right? Like understand, because that's so important, because sometimes you're helping them see their blind spots, right? Like they're so tunnel visioned into, this is what I need to get done. This is what I need to get approved. These are the meetings that I need to set up right now. And so admins have that insight of kind of what's going on all in the different ones, and also being able to speak to each other and really help each other to help your reports too. Like that just, I mean, you said it, right? Like you have to do that. That's the way that you can make the entire company better. And also you're the value add to the company as well, because you see that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be curious to know, sort of going back to sort of wrapping this all up, like you've worked with some pretty incredible leaders. So I'd love to know what you've learned from them and watching them work as a team, right? Like Sheryl has Zuck and the other great leaders at Facebook. Arianna has a fleet of amazing leaders that work with them. Obviously, when you work in the Senate, you have a ton of other individuals that you work with. So what have you learned about teamwork and leadership just from watching and interacting with them that you then have brought into like your day-to-day and coaching others?
Yeah. And this is kind of one of my favorite quotes too, is that you have to inspect what you expect without becoming a micromanager. And so, inspect yourself, what you expect of others without just, kind of that control and demand that we're all used to. And, same with sort of any role that we have. But definitely inspect what you expect from others is definitely.
That's so funny because we had that same saying when I worked at Four Seasons. So that was inspect what you expect. And that's how I learned how to not be a micromanager. And I actually tell this to a lot of administrative professionals and even my own team now. Because I think that's there's a difference between inspecting and being a micromanager. A micromanager doesn't give anybody the room to even breathe and try something. And so have you heard of tell, show, do, review?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's sort of the practice that I have always gone by whenever I give somebody a new task. Is you tell them what you want to accomplish, you show them once what the expectation is, here's what I want the result to be. Then you let them do it. Mm-hmm. And that's the part where you let them do it and then you inspect it and review it with them live when they get to either the completion point or if maybe they hit a roadblock and they want some guidance along the way. And that's something that it's so funny that you also use that inspect what you expect because, and then furthermore, once you've done it with them and you go through the tell, show, do, review process, every once in a while, every couple of weeks or every couple of months, depending on the length of a task or a project, you just do a check-in. It'll be kind of like a surprise, hey, I'm just going to see how this is coming along without letting them know. And then you're able to give some guidance. And so that's so funny that you do that. And that's something that you've also seen some of the greatest leaders in the world do as well.
Yeah.
So that's really, really interesting. Okay, great. I think we had maybe a one or two question.
Okay.
So we did have one person say, do you specifically coach executives? I know we talked about that you obviously coach admin teams, you've coached people sort of at all levels of an organization. So do you coach executives directly? And then I think a sort of secondary follow-up question to that I've had some people ask me directly that they've liked is, when you coach an EA, will you coach their executives simultaneously so you can see both sides of the coin, both sides of the story?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, do I coach executives? Absolutely. Yes. And then do I coach both? Yes. In our corporate coaching groups, which every company is different, but which I think is really cool too, is having executives with other people in the company as well, because that sort of just lightens it out too, right? And so to your point of having the executive and the assistant in the same group, absolutely. It definitely helps bridge it better too. And even, going back to my example with the hospital too, right? We had the CEO and his EA along with others and the executive teams and their EAs and, other groups. But again, hospital's huge, so we had multiple groups, but we definitely did that as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, I love that idea of, and again, kind of bringing it back to teamwork. A team isn't necessarily all the same people on the same level, but I love even the idea of these groups or these cohorts being an executive, their EA, maybe some of their direct reports or even some cross-functional leaders, because I think that helps it become a much more well-oiled machine when you have so many different perspectives of people in different positions, working in different functions within the company, because what is happening in product is very different from what's happening in marketing, which is very different from what an EA to a CTO is seeing. And so I think that's really, really interesting and a great way to bring a lot of different organizational units together.
Yeah. And also thinking about all of that, all of those people also have personal lives, right? So like sometimes we don't even take into account what's going on in their personal lives too. And though it's not, you know, again, I'm not telling people to blast out what's happening on their personal lives to the company or anything if you don't feel comfortable, but that we all bring our personal and whole selves to work, and sometimes vice versa too, you know? So to really have that, you know, just whole piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I remember we even had internally here, there was somebody who was having some challenges personally, and the way they were showing up, they looked really sad in meetings, but how it was being interpreted by other members of the team is that that person was like sad or mad at them, and it had absolutely nothing to do with them at all.
Right.
But they didn't have the context or the knowledge that there was something going on in this person's personal life. And once that was uncovered, because I think that's the one thing to always remember is like, people always think that they did something wrong. And it's helpful to have like that rephrasing in that context of like, oh, this has absolutely nothing to do with you. Like there's a completely different story happening.
100%.
And so, yeah, I think that being able to help like facilitate those conversations is super helpful.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Well, I know we're like almost done with time here. And so just wanted to quick sort of wrap this up, and thank you so much for joining us and giving us some context in your story and talking about not only what you've done as an administrative professional and supporting leaders and what you've learned from leaders, but also what you've learned about teamwork and how you've helped bring teams together. So for anybody who is watching this today and is interested in learning more, we are going to send, of course, a follow-up email just sharing the two different types of coaching that Hannah does, which is one-on-one coaching, but then, of course, this corporate coaching. So if you're not sure if your company is quite ready yet for bringing in sort of this transformational way of working together, you can always sort of try it before you buy it and work with Hannah Kay on a one-on-one basis to experience what it's like to work with her. So I really appreciate you joining us today, Hannah Kay, and sharing your story.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everyone who joined this webinar. So excited to continue the journey with all of you.
Great. Thanks. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.